Mafia boss discovers dying female cop on street. What happened next shocked the entire police force. He had rules, but today his emotions got the best part of him. He always ensures not to get involved in anyone's business, but this situation reminded him of his little sister. What he does next shocked the entire police force. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. Rick Smith never thought he would hear a dying woman calling for help in the back alley behind the warehouses. He had rules. Rules that had kept him alive for decades. Never cross into police business. Never get involved. Never show weakness. And yet, here he was, staring down a life that didn't belong to him, a life spilling out onto the wet concrete, gasping and trembling, and he couldn't just walk away. The alley smelled of rain, metal, and something darker he couldn't name. The puddles reflected the flickering light of a distant street lamp. He crouched slightly, his eyes scanning the figure slumped against the brick wall. Her uniform was torn, stained with blood that glistened in the dim light. Her badge caught the reflection. Detective. Police. The enemy. And yet, she looked at him like he was the only thing standing between her and nothing at all. Rick's mind raced. He thought of Tanya, his sister, gone too young, lost to a system that promised protection but delivered only apathy and greed. She had been 19, too young to die, addicted to drugs that were swept under the table by the very people sworn to stop them. He had spent years building a world where rules mattered, where control mattered. And now, those rules screamed at him, stay out. Walk away. Live. But every instinct in his body, the one that had kept him alive through gang wars, double crosses, and betrayals, pulled him closer. He saw her chest rising and falling in uneven, shallow gasps. He saw her hand trembling as it pressed futilely against the wound on her side. And he heard it, the quiet, almost inaudible, plea, help me. The choice should have been simple. Never get involved. But it wasn't. He wanted to step back, to breathe the cold night air, to tell himself that someone else would come. But deep inside, a voice he hadn't acknowledged in years whispered, not this time. Not again. Rick leaned down, one hand hovering above her shoulder, almost afraid to touch her. His heart hammered in a rhythm that made him dizzy. What do I do now? He thought. He knew that any choice would break him, break his rules, break his life as he had carefully constructed it. And yet, doing nothing was no longer an option. Somewhere deep down, he understood something he hadn't admitted. This wasn't just about her. This was about him. About every loss he had ever carried, every failure he had ever witnessed. It was about making a choice that would define him, or haunt him forever. And so, despite every instinct screaming at him to leave, Rick Smith made the decision that would change everything. He reached down and took her into his arms. Never had a simple choice felt so heavy. Rick carried her through the alley, her body light but fragile, every breath a shallow whisper against his chest. He ignored the burning in his arms, the ache in his back. He never had time for weakness, not in his world, but somehow, he felt it now, not as a burden, but as a reminder. Tanya had been like this once. Not beaten, not dying in a puddle, but lost. He had held her too, in those last moments when the world had turned its back. And he had failed. He refused to fail again. He was a man of rules. The Smith family was built on them. Loyalty, discretion, control. You kept your hands clean in public, your debts measured, your enemies predictable. And yet, here he was, breaking the first rule he had ever held sacred, never involve himself with the police. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to let her go, to let the system handle it. But the system had failed Tanya. And tonight, it was failing Ava. Rick's mind wandered down memory lanes he tried not to visit. He remembered sitting at the edge of his sister's hospital bed, holding her hand as machines beeped a rhythm that meant she had already gone too far. Tanya had been bright, funny, reckless, everything he admired and feared in equal measure. And when she died, the police didn't care. The dealers who supplied her did, only because they were paid off. The people who swore to protect her had their hands in the pockets of those who destroyed her. That night, Rick had vowed to live in a world where he controlled the rules. Where betrayal and greed could be managed, mitigated, harnessed. And yet, as he trudged through the streets, carrying a bleeding detective, he felt the old fire return, the one he had tried to bury beneath ledgers, threats, and deals. It wasn't about loyalty tonight. Not to family, not to business. It was about justice, about intervention where no one else dared, where the rules had failed. And for the first time in a long time, Rick realized that maybe, just maybe, he could still make a difference. He glanced down at Ava. Her eyes fluttered open, fear and confusion mingling with pain. "Who?" she rasped. "Someone who isn't going to let you die," he muttered, voice low, controlled, but betraying the tight knot of anxiety in his chest. He didn't say he was breaking every rule he had ever lived by. He didn't say he had made a life built on violence, secrecy, and control. He only focused on the next step, moving her somewhere safe. Rick had always been prepared. Always calculated. Every risk measured, every move planned. And yet, tonight, he was improvising. There were no contingency plans for a dying police detective in his arms. No scripts to follow. Just the pounding of his own heart and the echo of his sister's death whispering in the back of his mind, "Don't fail her like you failed Tanya." Every step he took was deliberate, precise, but internally, chaos churned. Questions swirled. Could he trust anyone? Was the private doctor still loyal after all these years? Could he control what would happen if the police found them? The answers didn't matter yet. What mattered was keeping her alive. And in that moment, Rick felt the rarest sensation, fear, not for himself, but for another life entirely. It was a fear that demanded action. A fear that reminded him why he had become Rick Smith in the first place. Not just a mafia boss. Not just a man who could bend the world to his will. But someone who could still choose to do the right thing, even when it defied everything he had ever believed. Rick's boots slapped against the slick pavement as he carried her deeper into the maze of warehouses, the faint glow of distant streetlights casting long shadows across rusted doors and broken windows. Each step was deliberate, controlled, but he felt the panic trying to creep in, clawing at the edges of his mind. Her breathing was ragged, shallow, and uneven. Blood seeped through his jacket where it pressed against her side. He set her down against a dumpster for a moment, just long enough to assess the damage. 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, internal bleeding. He recognized the injuries instantly, not because he was a doctor, but because he had seen death up close too many times. And he realized the worst part: someone had meant to kill her. Not an accident. Not a scuffle gone wrong. Someone had wanted her gone, silenced, erased. Rick swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to vanish into the night and let the law, or whatever remained of it, handle the mess. But he couldn't. Not tonight. Not like this. Her eyes fluttered open, dim with pain, but sharp in recognition. "You shouldn't," she rasped, voice broken, but defiant even in the face of death. "I know," Rick said quietly, his hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "But you're not going to die here. Not on my watch." Her gaze flicked toward him, confusion and disbelief mingled with the faintest hint of fear. "You, Mafia, why are you helping me?" He didn't answer. Words wouldn't explain it. Nothing could. Not the rage he carried from his sister's death. Not the fury at a corrupt system that failed again and again. He only knew one thing: leaving her here was no longer an option. Doing nothing wasn't an option. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, muted by the walls of the warehouses. That sound would have terrified any other person, but Rick felt a calm settle over him. It was a signal, a warning, a reminder. If anyone came too close, if anyone interfered, he would deal with them. This wasn't his world to police, but it was his world to protect. He lifted her again, feeling the weight of her injuries press against his chest, and moved toward a more secluded path he knew well. Narrow alleys, forgotten loading docks, rusted gates, places where he had made deals, watched rivals, marked territory. Now, it was a sanctuary. Not for business. Not for money. But for life. Rick's mind raced. Every step forward was a decision. Every choice carried risk. Could he trust the private doctor he had worked with in the past? Could he navigate the dangers of the streets while carrying someone on the edge of death? And what about the police? Any misstep, any exposure, could turn this situation catastrophic. Her hand twitched against his chest, and he felt her small pulse, rapid and weak. She was fighting. She didn't know it yet, but she was fighting for her life, and he had just made himself a part of that fight. For the first time in a long time, Rick felt the raw weight of responsibility, not for territory, not for money, not for loyalty, but for life itself. The choice was made, the line crossed. And with that line crossed, there was no going back. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. A rat scurried across the pavement. The city hummed around them, indifferent to the violence, indifferent to the lives dangling between survival and death. Rick tightened his grip, every sense alert. He wasn't just carrying a wounded detective. He was carrying the potential to unravel corruption, to confront betrayal, and perhaps, finally, to find a measure of redemption he hadn't dared to hope for. He didn't know the dangers ahead. He didn't know how far the corruption went, or who was waiting to finish the job. But as he moved through the shadows with her in his arms, he felt the only certainty he had ever known: he had to act. And act decisively. Rick moved quickly through the abandoned loading docks, the sound of his boots echoing off rusted walls. Ava's breathing was shallow but steady, a fragile rhythm he monitored constantly. He ignored the weight in his arms and the ache in his back. Every step forward was a battle of focus and instinct. The city around them was alive, humming with indifference. No one noticed. No one cared. And that was exactly how it had to be. The safe house wasn't far. Years of experience had taught him every hidden corner of the district, every abandoned doorway, every forgotten route. When he finally pushed open the reinforced steel door, the faint scent of antiseptic hit him, and the private doctor was already there, waiting with a bag of supplies. "Rick," the doctor said, his voice low but sharp. "She's bad. If we don't act fast, he stopped, realizing no words could capture the urgency. Rick didn't need words. He set Ava down gently on the cot, blood soaking the jacket beneath her. He glanced at the doctor, a silent question in his eyes. The man nodded, already tearing open a kit, hands moving with precision born of decades of practice. As the doctor worked, Rick stood back, scanning the room. The walls were lined with supplies, weapons tucked into corners, surveillance monitors flickering dimly. This was a place built for war, for secrets, for survival. And tonight, it would be for life. Ava groaned, pain flashing across her features as the doctor probed her injuries. Internal bleeding, collapsed lung, multiple fractures. If we stabilize her, she'll survive. If not, the unspoken threat hung in the air. Rick clenched his fists. He had broken every rule he had lived by to get her here, and there was no turning back. He realized something he hadn't admitted even to himself: he didn't just want her alive. He wanted the truth. He wanted justice, for her, for his sister, for every life the corrupt system had stolen. Hours passed in a tense blur. The doctor worked tirelessly, cleaning wounds, stitching tissue, stabilizing broken bones. Rick stayed at Ava's side, monitoring her breathing, listening for the faintest signs of improvement. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, she moved, weakly opening her eyes. "Rick," her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "I'm here," he said simply, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're going to be okay. But you need to trust me." She tried to speak, to protest, but her body betrayed her. Rick understood. Trust was not easy, especially when she had spent years chasing justice and he had spent years living outside the law. But she needed him now, whether she wanted it or not. And then she began to talk, in fragments at first. Something about her investigation, police corruption, bribes, payoffs from dealers and organized crime figures, a partner named Michael and 6 others who had tried to silence her. Her words were scattered, but the picture became clear: the very people who swore to uphold the law had turned against her. Rick listened, every detail sharpening the fire inside him. The world had failed his sister. It was failing this woman too. And he was the only one who could step in. By the time she fell into a fitful sleep, Rick had made a decision. He would protect her. He would fight. He would expose the corruption. Even if it meant breaking every law, every code, every principle he had ever lived by. Outside, the city continued its indifferent hum. Inside, the safe house became a fortress, a place where strategy replaced chance, where alliances were forged, where the enemy would soon discover that Rick Smith was not a man to be crossed lightly. He began to plan. He knew Michael and his crew would come for her. He knew the police force would circle. And he knew that if he failed, this woman, and the chance for justice, would be gone. But he also knew that he had a unique set of tools, skills, and people at his disposal, resources built over a lifetime of survival in the shadows. And so, with the night pressing close around the reinforced walls of the safe house, Rick prepared. Not for a simple fight. Not for a small victory. But for war. The next morning, the city was indifferent, as always. Rick watched from the reinforced windows of the safe house, eyes tracing the streets below. Every movement was familiar, vendors setting up carts, cars rolling past, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating, anticipating. He knew Michael and his crew wouldn't wait long. Corrupt cops never did. Ava stirred, still fragile, but alert enough to demand answers. "They'll come," she said quietly, voice hoarse. "Michael. And the others. They know I'm alive." Rick nodded. "I know. And we'll be ready." He could see the lines forming in her expression, the same lines he had seen in soldiers, in survivors. Determination wrapped in pain. He respected it. He needed it. By mid-afternoon, the first warning arrived. A car, black and unmarked, lingered too long down the street. Rick's men, 20 loyal and heavily armed, fanned out on the rooftops. Every alley, every corner, every potential vantage point was accounted for. Ava watched in awe as Rick moved with precision, issuing terse instructions, checking the locks, the alarms, the escape routes. "I've never seen this before," she admitted. You prepare for everything." "I prepare for survival," he corrected. "Everything else is irrelevant." Hours passed with tension simmering. The car didn't move, didn't leave. Finally, Michael emerged, flanked by 3 others, each with guns loosely visible under jackets. They called out, voices carrying arrogance and threat. "Rick. We know she's here. Hand her over, and maybe we let you walk away." Rick stepped to the window, scanning the street. "You've made mistakes before, Michael. This is another one." Ava flinched. He didn't hesitate. "Stay down," he instructed, tone sharp, leaving no room for argument. The standoff lasted minutes that felt like hours. Gun barrels glinted in the sun, tension snapping with every twitch of a finger on a trigger. And then, Rick made a move. He didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, he orchestrated a show of force. His men appeared in calculated positions, rooftops, corners, shadows. 20 men, visible, ready, and lethal. Michael hesitated. The arrogance faltered. He wasn't used to confrontation this meticulous, this precise. He cursed under his breath and disappeared into a side street, calling for backup. That was the problem. Backup meant 40 more officers, a web of corruption that could strangle them if they weren't careful. Rick's mind raced. He knew the game now. Every corrupt officer involved, every hidden ally in uniform, every single loophole in the system, they had underestimated him. And he wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. Inside, Ava watched him, a mix of fear and respect. "You're crazy," she whispered, a faint smile cutting through the exhaustion. "I've been called worse," Rick replied dryly. But he didn't relax. Not for a second. The hours stretched, anticipation building. Michael's men prowled the perimeter, radio chatter carrying threats, impatience. Rick and Ava stayed inside, planning their moves. Maps were spread across tables, gunmetal glinting beside documents. Every corridor, every approach, every escape route was accounted for. And then, Rick spoke in a low, deliberate tone. "We expose them. All of them. Not just Michael. Not just his crew. The ones who've been corrupt for years, the ones who helped destroy your case, and others like it." Ava's eyes widened. Even if it means working with you?" Rick paused. He met her gaze. "For now, yes. We have a common goal. After that, we deal with the rest. But tonight, the fight is survival. And justice." The night fell heavy and oppressive. Shadows pressed against the walls, blending with fear and anticipation. Every creak, every distant siren, every whisper of wind became a potential threat. Yet inside, in that fragile safe house, a partnership had formed, unlikely, tense, but vital. Rick glanced at her sleeping figure, bandages wrapped tightly, fragile but alive. He thought of Tanya again, remembered the helplessness he had felt. This time, he wouldn't fail. This time, he would bend the world if he had to. The first gunshots came shortly after midnight. They ricocheted against the empty warehouses, sharp and chaotic. Rick moved, calm and precise, directing his men, positioning Ava safely behind barricades. It wasn't a firefight. Not yet. It was a test of strategy, skill, and nerves. And Rick thrived in tests. The night had grown taut with tension, like a wire stretched to breaking. Outside the safe house, sirens screamed as Michael's backup arrived, 40 uniformed officers, some clean, some hiding their greed behind badges, closing the perimeter. Rick's men held their positions, 20 in total, perched above on rooftops, in shadows, ready for anything. Rick stepped forward, into the faint light spilling from the reinforced windows. Ava, still weak, looked up at him with eyes wide, alive and burning with trust he hadn't earned yet. "Are you ready?" she whispered, voice barely audible. He nodded. "Ready," he said, though he knew this wasn't about readiness. It was about necessity. There were no options left. Only action. Rick grabbed a megaphone. His voice cut through the night, sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. "This ends tonight," he shouted. "Detective Ava Hayes is alive. Corrupt officers, payoffs, bribes, murders, every one of you who broke the law under the badge will be exposed." Confusion erupted immediately. Officers looked at each other, some reaching for radios, some frozen, realization dawning. Michael cursed, trying to assert control, but the momentum had shifted. Chaos replaced authority. Ava's voice joined in, weak but resolute. 3 years of documented corruption, files, recordings, witnesses. They tried to kill me to cover it up. Rick and Ava moved quickly, using the confusion as cover. The FBI, led by Agent Torres, arrived minutes later, securing evidence from both sides. Rick handed over recordings, notes of payoffs, evidence he had meticulously collected over years. Ava handed over her files, charts, recordings, the trail of betrayal so long it made even the clean officers' jaws tighten. Michael and his crew were trapped in their own hubris. The corrupt officers, previously confident, were now exposed, isolated, caught between the law they had manipulated and the force of the truth Rick and Ava wielded. The confrontation reached its crescendo inside the warehouse. Shouts, orders, objections, and silence punctuated by the presence of federal authority. For once, Rick was not alone, yet every move, every decision he had made led to this exact moment. The culmination of months of preparation, desperation, and moral reckoning. By dawn, the immediate chaos had settled. Arrests were made. Michael was led away in handcuffs, still muttering threats that now fell on deaf ears. 15 officers were taken into custody, 3 city councilmen indicted, and the ripple extended further than anyone expected. Judges, a deputy mayor, all implicated in a web of corruption now fully exposed. Ava sat back, exhausted but alive. Her uniform, torn and blood-stained, was now a symbol of resilience. Rick stood beside her, breathing heavily, scanning the room one last time. There was no victory in the sense of relief, only the bitter satisfaction of justice served. And yet, for Rick, the fight had been personal too. He looked at her and, for the first time, allowed himself a private acknowledgement of what had driven him, the memory of Tanya, of helplessness, of failure. This time, he hadn't failed. The night faded into the early morning, carrying with it the echoes of confrontation, exposure, and consequences. The city was unchanged, indifferent, but within the walls of the safe house, a shift had occurred. Lines had been drawn, truths revealed, alliances forged under impossible circumstances. And Rick, for the first time in years, felt the weight of something other than power. He felt closure. Not complete. Not permanent. But enough to know that, in this battle, the cost had been paid and justice had been served, at least, for now. 3 weeks later, the city's hum carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside the walls of the police precinct and the quiet corners of the safe house, everything had shifted. 15 corrupt officers had been arrested, 3 city councilmen indicted, 2 judges facing federal charges, a deputy mayor resigned in disgrace. Justice, imperfect and costly, had made its mark. Ava Hayes, now promoted to lieutenant, walked the halls with her badge restored, her uniform crisp, her gaze steady. She carried herself differently, stronger, sharper, tempered by the chaos she had survived. She had seen corruption up close, survived betrayal, and come out alive. She had survived Rick Smith. Rick, standing on the edge of the city he had once ruled from the shadows, looked out at the streets below. He had a name few knew. A past even fewer understood. Liam Grant. He revealed it quietly, to no one in particular, and let the world know he was stepping away. Retiring. No more deals, no more shadows, no more secrets. He had dismantled the empire he had built, not for redemption alone, but because some battles were worth the cost. And this one had been paid in full, in blood, fear, and courage. Ava returned to her work, renewed, aware that the fight against corruption was far from over. And Liam, once Rick Smith, began a life with fewer shadows, though the echoes of the past remained. Justice had come from unlikely places. Redemption had arrived in the chaos. And both of them knew, in their own way, that the cost of doing what was right was never small, but sometimes, it was worth everything. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.